Hello, everyone. Welcome. What a blessing it is for us to be here in this national study this week. Last time, we finished reading the sacred words of Masaaki-Sama, A Glorious Future We Near. In that reading, we learned about the relationship God-human, what it means for us, and what it means for the salvation of humanity. We learned that we are not the ones receiving, but our true self is the one that descends, that brings that salvation. This week, we're going to read more into this topic, learning about why Meishu-sama was able to reach this point, God-human, and how to follow in his footsteps. In the reading of Kyoshu-sama and Masaaki-Sama, Receiving the Will of Meishu-sama, number 28. I'm really excited to read this with you, so stay tuned as we begin right after this. As we begin this week's study, let us, in the name of Messiah, which is one with Meishu-sama, one with Jesus Christ, recognize that it is only by God's grace and by Kyoshu-sama's permission that we are able to hold these studies. Without the holy seat of Kyoshu, it would be impossible for us to receive the will of Meishu-sama and to understand his sacred words. And even that, it would be even more impossible to follow in his footsteps. So let us, with this grateful heart, begin our study. Let us also, as we do the reading this week, recognize that the very thoughts and feelings that we have during this study are the thoughts and feelings of all our ancestors, maternal and paternal ancestors, alive within us, who have those same kinds of thoughts and feelings, and the very things that God atoned for and forgave within each one of us. And together with them, let us return to heaven, return to our true Father as ones who have been forgiven and saved. With this grateful heart, I would like to begin our study with the reading of the Church Canon. Church Canon. With great fear of God, we acknowledge that the Lord God is our true Father, the one and only God. We revere Meishu-sama as the model for all humanity and as our own example to follow. Meishu-sama, who was born anew as a true child of God the Messiah, by receiving the divine will that God accomplished in heaven. We believe that Jesus Christ, who 2,000 years ago embodied the name of Messiah, the name most holy and high, is serving the Lord God in unity with Meishu-sama. We regard the sacred word of Kyoshu-sama, who reveals to us the will of Meishu-sama in this material world, as the sole, absolute, and irreplaceable foundation in advancing our mission here on earth. Words of prayer. God, I acknowledge that you are alive. Within me, you are alive. I thank you for nurturing me to be newly born as your child. May this blessing be shared with all. In the name of Messiah, which is one with Meishu-sama, I surrender myself to you. Please use me as you wish. Thank you very much. Every week we share an Instagram post from our mother church. And before reading this Instagram post, I'd like to invite all of you to follow this page on Instagram. It is super simple. Just open up Instagram on your phone, search for World Church of Messiah. Once the page opens, at the top, you'll see the page name, and under that, the follow button. Just click on that button. Once you clicked on that button, click the bell sign on the top right-hand corner. That little bell is your notification signs. It tells the app that you're giving it permission to notify you when new posts are made. This is a great way to be reminded. If we forget during the day, when the posts come in, we can check and we can connect ourselves, receiving the sacred words directly from the holy seat of Kyoshu that are being posted on a daily basis. This is just a wonderful way to really realign our sone when all this hectic stuff is going on in our day-to-day lives. But don't just end there. Make sure you hit the share button and share these posts with your family and friends. It's the best gift you can give anyone, the gift of getting to know their true Father through the holy seat of Kyoshu, how to truly communicate with our Father, our God, our Creator, and unite ourselves in one heart with Meishu-sama and Jesus Christ. So share that button. With that in mind, I'd like to read to you today Kyoshu-sama's hymns from 2024. Actually, this one hymn from April 2024. And it reads as follows. What clouds our hearts? It is the sin we committed, the sin of taking possession of our souls. What clouds our hearts? It is the sin we committed, the sin of taking possession of our souls. Until I began receiving Kyoshu-sama's sacred words, I had not realized about this sin I had committed, this grave sin of taking possession of my soul. And I think even today, little by little, it's becoming more and more clear how much I've taken possession of my soul, of my life, everything that belongs to God. And we're going to see that this is a key point. Becoming aware of this truth and repenting is a key point to why Meishu-sama attained this position, God, human, and how we can follow in his footsteps through today's reading. So with this in mind, I'd like to read with you today Kyoshu-sama and Masaaki-Sama, Receiving the Will of Meishu-sama, number 28. It was published on the Glory magazine number 31 on August 1st, 2022. And the title is Members of World Church of Messiah. Have you already turned into God humans? Members of World Church of Messiah. Have you already turned into God humans? Meishu-sama's sacred word. We have the following. Oh, what a sight it is. Black, ominous clouds cover the whole world, and the roaring tempest is nearing. But lo and behold, in the corner of the sky, a light shines, and God humans are quietly descending, riding on clouds of glory. Wouldn't you be happy if I told you that they are all followers of World Church of Messiah? Epigram, March 7th, 1951. Just making a quick pause here. How many of us have seen this sacred word of Meishu-sama before? I was really awestruck when I read this sacred word in this collection. And look at the state of the world that Meishu-sama is describing. He's describing a world filled with black, ominous clouds and a tempest. The storm is nearing, right? But look at the excitement. Below and behold, in the corner of the sky, a light shines. Can you imagine that? All being dark and covered, right? As the storm is approaching and this light comes through and God humans are quietly descending. And on top of that, Meishu-sama says, wouldn't you be happy if I told you that they are all followers of World Church of Messiah? Further, he shares how pitiful it is that even though we are born as humans, existences that are truly precious, we should end our days on earth by becoming so low in existence as animals. It must be an eternal truth that humans become animals when they fall and become gods when they rise. That is, a human being is a living being that exists midway between God and animal. In this sense, I believe that a truly civilized person is one who has freed themselves from their animality, and that culture will progress only when animalized humans are turned into divine ones. To sum this up, the place where divine humans gather, this is what I call a paradise on earth. So I believe many of us have read this sacred word of Meishu-sama before, right? And maybe we're trying to piece these together as to what we're receiving from Kyoshu-sama and Masaaki-Sama to try to understand and make sense of this, right? But Meishu-sama describing the current state of the world. Meishu-sama describing the true state of members of World Church of Messiah, the current state of the world. And he's saying here how pitiful it is that even though we are born as humans, existences that are truly precious, right? Existences that in the truest sense are divine humans, as Meishu-sama is putting here in the last paragraph, we are not freed from this animality and end up our days so low in existence as animals. Right? Furthermore, the place where these divine humans gather, this is what he calls a paradise on earth. This is really amazing for us to receive because Meishu-sama is describing the very true essence of that paradise on earth. Right? Further, he says, in the first place, what is the universe? Everybody knows that in its infinite space, the sun, the moon, the earth, and the stars exist. Actually, this planet Earth that we live on is the center of the universe and the Lord. The sun, the moon, and the stars exist for the earth. The earth exists for all the celestial bodies. In order to carry out the plan of God on the earth, human beings were created to act on behalf of God. Needless to say, God prepared all creation for human beings. When you think about this, you can see how grave and important the mission of human beings is. It is to materialize the will of God on this earth, on this very earth. It is only when you become aware of this mission that you can become a true human being. The Plan of God, September 28th, 1942. As we read this sacred word, this is really shocking, I believe, for many of us, right? Because Meishu-sama says that planet Earth, the earth that we live on, is the center of the universe and Lord. The sun, the moon, and the stars exist for the earth, and the earth exists for all the celestial bodies. I think this is very different from how many people think today, is it not? Further, in this sacred word, he says, in order to carry out the plan of God on the earth, human beings were created to act on behalf of God. Needless to say, God prepared all creation for human beings. So, when we first read this, it's very, very easy, at least for me, the way I used to look at it. God created everything for me. I can use everything as I please, right? But is that really what's being said here? On top of that, look at the phrase before that. Human beings were created to act on behalf of God. What exactly does that mean? Is the question, right? to act on behalf of God, if you really think about it, that expression means with the authority of God, does it not? And Meishu-sama further goes on and writes, when you think about this, you can see how grave and important the mission of human beings is. It is to materialize the will of God on this earth. Our very mission is to materialize God's will on the earth. Not to materialize our will, not to materialize our desires, but God's will on earth. And further, Meishu-sama says, it is only when you become aware of this mission that you can become a true human being. A true human being in this sense, as we just read, is a divine human being, right? As Meishu-sama is talking about God, humans. But to truly put this into perspective, to truly be able to receive this sacred word, we need to read further into Kyoshu-sama's sacred word, Masaaki-sama's sacred word. This, at face value, is impossible to just read and say, I can grasp that, right? Because we can totally take this from a human point of view, misconstrue it, twist it around to our convenience, and totally miss the point as we have for so long. And this is really, just shows how important it is for us to be receiving the sacred words on a daily basis and studying this. And with this, I like to read with you what Kyoshu-sama shares about this because it is so enlightening. Look what Kyoshu-sama shares. Our idea of human life is limited to life on the earth, isn't it? Your life begins when you are born to your father and mother, and it ends when you die. You live up to a certain age, and then you eventually die. Isn't this what we think it is to be a human being? Life is limited and hard, but still we want to find some happiness in it. Isn't this our idea of life? But look at what Meishu-sama is saying. He is saying to climb up to heaven first. He's saying that each human being also must become a resident of heaven. Or rather, the time has come when a human being can become its resident. The one who bore us really is God. We came from the one who bore us. Where is our origin? Our origin is where God is. The place where we let our first cry on this earth is not our origin. We were born from God, and our origin is the world called heaven. When I say this, you may think that since you came to the earth, you already left heaven, but that's not true. Even now, you are not separated from heaven. You still possess heaven within, even now. You possess within you God's Spirit, something that is perfect. Just a quick pause, right? When we think about our birth, we think about our physical birth, right? Rarely do we even think about the fact that we were born from God, our true birth. Furthermore, when we think about heaven, have we ever considered, before reading Kyoshu-sama's sacred word, that within us we possess heaven even now? The heaven exists within us because God's Spirit exists within us. And that Spirit is perfect. It's hard to think of that perfectness, right? When we see all the imperfections of our lives. Is it not true? But within you, even now, Kyoshu-sama is saying, you possess within you God's Spirit, something that is perfect. That's why we're not separated from heaven, right? And he continues, our true self is shining brilliantly, even now. Without this true body, we cannot even live now. We cannot even breathe, be joyful, or suffer. While we don't usually think about these things, it's so mysterious, isn't it? As we read this sacred word of Kyoshu-sama, it really helps that in our previous study, we were reading the sacred word of Masaaki-sama, clarifying this for us, right? Because Kyoshu-sama is talking about our true self shining brilliantly. What is our true self as we've been reading? It's the very Spirit of God, something that is perfect. That is our true self that we're reading about here. And without that true self, we cannot breathe, be joyful, or suffer. When we are going through these feelings of joy, of pain, suffering, don't we tend to think, I'm experiencing this right now? God, if you're in heaven somewhere, please help me go through this. Please help me overcome this, right? I'm feeling this. Help me. Isn't that the normal human way of thinking when we go through this? But Kyoshu-sama here is sharing with us something revolutionary, right? Something that is totally out of this world, where he says, without this true body, we cannot even live now. We cannot even breathe, be joyful, or suffer. There is no us. There's no life. There are no feelings without this true body. To put it in another way, he says, a physical body exists because there is a spiritual body, although it sounds like the other way around. When you think about all this, what does Meishu-sama mean by saying you must climb up to heaven first and become its resident? Or each human being also must become a resident of heaven. It means that you have to recall that all of you actually belong to heaven and that you came from heaven originally. He is trying to make us recall or realize this. Just make a quick pause, right? Because it's so important, right? As Kyoshu-sama has been guiding us in this sacred word of Meishu-sama to climb up to heaven first. I think many of us have many ideas of this heaven, right? What we would like it to be, what we imagine it to be. But Kyoshu-sama is showing us that we must recall this truth or realize this. When I hear the word recall many times, right, in a very human sense, I think, well, I don't remember that. I don't have that memory, right? But here it is a realization. It's recognizing this truth, this fundamental truth. Means that you have to recall that you actually belong to heaven. Realize that you belong to heaven. You don't belong to this world. You belong to heaven. And that you came from heaven originally, right? This heaven that exists within us, this true spirit is our true self, right? Our true self is this true spiritual body within us, which is God's spirit, something that is perfect, right? Your true self is not you. It is this Spirit of God within you. And it came from heaven. It belongs in heaven, as we are reading here, right? We truly belong to that, our true self. realizing this is what it means to climb up to heaven first. So, as we were reading, right, regarding this animality that we have, for a long time, I used to think I need to separate myself from that animality, right? So I can climb up to heaven. I need to become perfect first so I can return to that heaven. But as we've been reading in Kyoshu-sama's sacred words, in Masaaki-sama's sacred words, it's not that. It is climbing up to heaven first with all that, right? Originally, we came from there. We belong there. That's where we're from. It's not about becoming perfect to go there. Our true self is already perfect. It is from there. It belongs there. With everything, we return there. We realize this truth. And then Kyoshu-sama says, when you think about your life, or actually anything for that matter, don't think on the basis of this material world only, but think on the basis that your origin is in heaven. Membership meeting, Kyoshu-sama's visit to the members of the Kyoto Shiga missionary area, May 14th, 2017. This is also another thing that I've beginning to learn through Kyoshu-sama and Masaaki-sama, right? When I think about the world and I think about everything and receive Meishu-sama's sacred word, it's always, even receiving Kyoshu-sama's sacred word, Masaaki-sama's sacred word, I always tend to think about this material world only. So when we read in the beginning of this study, Meishu-sama's sacred word regarding the earth, for example, and the earth being the center of the universe, what did we all probably do as we were reading there? We were reading, thinking about this world only, were we not? How is that possible? No, the universe is so vast and the earth is so small. And how can this be? And how can that be? And we have all these things that come up. But the basis of our thought, the basis of analyzing that and trying to comprehend that is human-centered. It's not looking at our origin, which is heaven, not looking at why we are really here, is it? And as we read in that very sacred word from Meishu-sama, if we don't know why we're here, we can't become truly divine humans, right? We have to recognize why we are really here. As we read, pulling up that slide, where Meishu-sama says, when you think about this, you can see how grave and important the mission of a human being is. It is to materialize the will of God on this very earth. It is only when you become aware of this mission that you can become a true human being. Right? But how can we realize this? How can we do this if we don't recognize where we're truly from, as Kyoshu-sama is showing us, right? So Kyoshu-sama is really guiding us how to become this true human being. Kyoshu-sama is guiding us how to truly fulfill our mission, right? And furthermore, I mean, to really be able to go deeper and grasp this, I think we need to read Masaaki-sama's sacred word, because we think, oh, this is nice. I understand what Kyoshu-sama is saying, but really, I think it's much deeper than we think about, right? As Masaaki-sama brought up in one of his sacred words, are we really getting this, right? What Kyoshu-sama is sharing with us, do we really understand what he's saying? As he made a comment in one of the sacred words that Kyoshu-sama shared. So, regarding this, look what Masaaki-sama shares with us. He says, do you know that Meishu-sama used the expression unification of God and the human? Meishu-sama first accomplished the unification of God and the human, and then became the Messiah later. God and human united as one. But when you come to think of it, the human part is also created by God, right? Whatever is included in a human being has been created by God, right? The existence of a human being and their mind, their thoughts, their physical body, their everything have been created by God and belong to Him, right? When Meishu-sama said that he achieved the unification of God and the human, or I might say God-human, he thought like this: everything that I believe to belong to humans actually belongs to God. That is what the unification of God and the human is. In that sense, in order to achieve a unification of God and a human, you have to have the most humble attitude a human being can have. So, just making a quick pause, right? Because as we've been reading, right, we read Meishu-sama's sacred words. God human, right? God humans descending. And how we are here to fulfill God's purpose and God's mission, and become this true human being. And then we read from Kyoshu-sama that we must return to heaven first, right? That we have to climb to heaven first, realizing that our true self is God's spirit, right? But it's not until reading this sacred word of Masaaki-sama that we see that it's not just about understanding all this, right? It's not about just knowing this truth and think, oh, of course I know that. Oh, now I'm God human. No, it goes even deeper, and he shows us, right, that this unification of God human is only possible with the most humble attitude a human being can have toward God, right? And why is that? He shares with us. Until today, when we heard that Meishu-sama accomplished the unification of God and the human, we thought that he became a very elevated being. But actually, it was the opposite. He became more and more humble before God. He lowered himself so much before God. Making a quick pause here, right? How many of us thought of Meishu-sama in this way? I thought Meishu-sama rose, became very divine, very elevated, and that's why he became God human, right? Furthermore, if you go back just one slide, right, or two slides, where Masaaki-sama says, whatever is included in a human being has been created by God, I thought, well, for us to achieve this God human, I have to remove this very bad part within me, right? This not godly part within me, and elevate myself like Meishu-sama did, right? But this is not what happened with Meishu-sama, right? As Masaaki-sama is showing us, he says, until today, when we heard that Meishu-sama accomplished the unification of God and the human, we thought that he became a very elevated being. But actually, it was the opposite. He became more and more humble before God. He lowered himself so much before God. Initially, Meishu-sama thought, this and this belong to me. But then he began to think, oh, actually, this belongs to God, and this too. In the end, he realized that everything belonged to God, and so he returned everything to God. Just another quick pause, right? Because as we read in Meishu-sama's sacred word, when he says everything was created for a human being, right, to fulfill this mission of God, Meishu-sama, as we're seeing here, was not looking from a human point of view, right? Masaaki-sama showing us he realized that everything belonged to God and returned everything to God. But when we hear that phrase in the sacred word, don't we do the opposite? This was created for me. Like I've heard before in studies, right? Well, if God created everything for human beings, right, then isn't it okay to do as I please? To move along as I will? To have and fulfill what I would like? It's the very opposite, right? We think this is all created for me, and we, not our true selves, we look at us here on this earth, like here's someone saying, thinking on the human part of that, from the human aspect, looking at the world, and we say, well, everything's created for me. And I believe that's the same posture that originally Meishu-sama had. This and this and this belong to me. But then he began to think, as Masaaki-sama says, oh, actually, this belongs to God, and this too. In the end, he realized that everything belonged to God, and so he returned everything to God. That is what the unification of God and human means. To return everything to God is the unification of God and a human. Think, he says, to realize that you own nothing is the most humble attitude you can have toward God, don't you think? For you assume that nothing is yours. The unification of God-human is to realize that you own nothing, that everything belongs to God. I used to think the unification of God-human is I elevate myself, become so special, become all powerful, right? Like a superhero. That's not the unification of God-human. Unification of God and human is to realize that you own nothing. And Masaaki-sama says to realize that you own nothing is the most humble attitude you can have toward God. For you, don't you think? For you assume that nothing is yours. Then he says, compared to Meishu-sama, we are so arrogant, aren't we? For we are so attached to our human part. You can be a God-human or a Messiah only when you lower yourself so much before God, when you humble yourself so much before God. In that case, the idea we have had about matters like the unification of God and a human or Messiah has been completely opposite of what it actually is, hasn't it? But I must say that it is different from the being humble that we usually talk about in this human world. By this, I mean the humbleness where you try to be humble while being very aware that you are the one who is being humble, holding very tightly onto your human side. In the eyes of God, this is not humble at all. Rather, God sees this as arrogant, for we never let go of our human part. This is a really, really, really powerful point, right? And I think everybody when they read this the first time, they're like, hey, what do you mean? One more time? And I like to read that with you one more time. But I must say that it is different from the being humble that we usually talk about in this human world. By this, I mean the humbleness where you try to be humble while being very aware that you are the one who is being humble, holding very tightly onto your human side. I think it's like a second nature to us, right? We do that so without perception, right? Oh, so I have to be humble before God. Okay, how can I do this? How can I strive? Oh, I'm getting there. I'm becoming more and more humble. I'm doing this. I'm doing that. The whole time we're holding on very tightly to our human self, as we're seeing here, right? We are the ones doing, we're the ones going, we're the ones actively making that happen, right? It's all about us in the process. Rather, God sees this as arrogant, for we never let go of our human part. Much like someone's showing here, right? So to really be able to be humble before God, God recognizing that as humble, we have to let go of our human part. To be humble before God means you acknowledge that everything belongs to God and that at the same time, everything belongs to you. Everything belongs to you. That is why to be really humble before God might appear to be very arrogant in the eyes of humans. If we go into that, if we look at the relationship between God, human, right? Our human self, as we read in the last study, the part that receives, the part that we're very attached to, that we think this is us, that we're doing, this part that's very arrogant before God, right? We have to let go. We have to surrender everything, recognize that belongs to God, right? Without our true self, as Kyoshu-sama says, without the Spirit of God, this perfect existence within us, there is no us. We don't live, we don't breathe, we don't feel, we don't exist. We cease to be, right? Without it. So we have to really lower ourselves extremely to God, recognizing that, right? But at the same time, as Masaaki-sama says here, everything belongs to God. Everything belongs to you. Everything belongs to this true self. It's here for this true self to fulfill this purpose, this mission of God, right? Which, if we only look in human terms without seeing this true self, this true body, it is extremely arrogant, right? Oh, everything belongs to me. It's for me to use, to do, but not in the human sense, right? It's for us to fulfill God's purpose. This is really an eye opener, I think, for any of us, right? And Masaaki-sama continues, he says, I mean, God even granted the authority to forgive to Meishu-sama, precisely because he was so humble before God. To the request, please forgive the sins of all humanity, Meishu-sama nodded, right? That was what happened on June 15th, 1954, right? If God did not allow him to do so, Meishu-sama would not even have been able to nod. But since God thought that Meishu-sama was a child who truly walked in accordance with his will, God, I believe, even granted him the authority to forgive. Well, although it might not be very appropriate to make this kind of comparison, if your children are behaving very well, you want to give them whatever they want, right? God granted the authority to forgive to Meishu-sama because Meishu-sama was humble, not because Meishu-sama became such an elevated human being. Reading as Masaaki-sama is explaining this now, right? It makes a lot more sense, wouldn't you agree? Humans, as we read in Meishu-sama's sacred word, came to act on behalf of God, right? To fulfill God's purpose. To act on behalf of God is to be able to forgive like God, as we are seeing, right? But this was only possible because Meishu-sama became so humble before God. Not because Meishu-sama became such an elevated human being. Do you see how the puzzle pieces fit together as we read the sacred words of Kyoshu-sama and Masaaki-sama? how the entirety of the sacred word actually fits together, how beautiful this is, how exciting it is to have this sacred word. And Masaaki-sama continues, now, if the name given to the divine soul that exists within us is Messiah, we also need to be humble before God. Some people might be thinking, if all people turn into messiahs, so many people would be acting like kings. That's not good, but that's not how things go. If anyone really turns into a messiah, that person will be so humble before God. To young staff members, April 14th, 2016. This, I think, is really, as we're seeing, right, the essence of this existence, God, human, of our true self, and how these two parts are really being united as one. And God using us for that and nurturing us for that. And I can't express it enough how blessed we are to have the Holy Seed of Kyoshu, to have Kyoshu-sama and Masaaki-Sama really guiding us to receive this will of God and these sacred words of Meishu-sama. I mean, without this breakdown, would we ever have really got it? Probably not. Definitely not. I think we would be still on the mentality, right? If all people return into messiahs, so many people would be acting like kings. This is preposterous. Or how can the earth be the center of the universe? How can we be here to act on behalf of God? How can we be God humans, right? This is just, pie in the sky as it's expressed in this world, right? It's just illusionary. It's just not possible because we've been so trapped in this human way of thinking, not seeing the world from God's view, from God's way of thinking, as Kyoshu-sama and Masaaki-Sama are clarifying for us now, and really guiding us to follow in the footsteps of Meishu-sama. So together with you, I like to go forward seeking to return everything to God, right? Acknowledging that we're being permitted to return everything to God, to serve in His true purpose. As Masaaki-sama is saying here, if the name given to the divine soul that exists within us is Messiah, we also need to be humble before God. And with this true posture, walk this path of Meishu-sama, this path that makes all humanity be born anew as children of God, Messiahs. Thank you for joining us. May all honor, may all glory be returned to God always.